You've probably kissed someone this week, maybe today. A quick pet goodbye, a long one hello, something in between. You didn't think about it, your lips just knew what to do. But here's something that's going to sound completely wrong the first time you hear it. Kissing is not universal. It is not hardwired into every human culture on Earth. There are entire societies, entire histories of people, who looked at the idea of pressing your mouth against someone else's mouth and found it genuinely strange, even repulsive. So if kissing isn't some ancient instinct built into all of us the same way, where did it actually come from? The answer runs through chimpanzees, ancient clay tablets, ideas about spit and saliva, and a debate that anthropologists are still arguing about right now. Let's start with the biology, because your body has opinions about kissing that have nothing to do with romance. When two people kiss, they're exchanging saliva, and saliva carries an enormous amount of biological information. It carries hormones, it carries bacteria. And most interestingly, it carries traces of something called MHC, the major histocompatibility complex, a set of genes involved in immune function. Some researchers believe that close facial contact, including kissing, might have originally functioned as an unconscious way to sample someone's biological compatibility. Your nose and your mouth pick up signals your conscious brain never processes, and those signals may have helped early humans judge whether a potential partner's immune system paired well with their own for producing healthier offspring. In other words, before kissing meant anything romantic, it may have functioned as a hidden biological test, one you didn't even know you were taking. Now here's where it gets interesting, because humans aren't the only species that do something like this. Bonobos, one of our closest living relatives, kiss. Full mouth-to-mouth contact, sometimes with tongue involved, used to calm tension, reinforce social bonds, and smooth over conflict within the group. Chimpanzees, on the other hand, our other closest relative, rarely do this. They'll press lips together occasionally, but it's nowhere near as common or as socially loaded as it is for bonobos. So somewhere in the primate family tree, this behavior appears, disappears, and reappears depending on the species. That inconsistency is a big clue. It suggests kissing isn't some single ancient behavior passed down in a straight line. It looks more like something that gets reinvented, abandoned, and reinvented again depending on the social needs of the group using it. So when did humans specifically start doing it on purpose as a romantic or sexual act? The earliest written evidence comes from Bronze Age Mesopotamia, in cuneiform tablets and Vedic Sanskrit texts, both dating back roughly 4,500 years. These texts describe kissing in surprisingly explicit romantic and sexual contexts, not as a greeting, but as an act of desire between partners. That's genuinely old, but here's the twist that most people never hear about. For decades, historians assumed kissing spread outward from there, the same way farming or writing spread, gradually moving from the Middle East into Europe, Asia, and eventually the rest of the world. Recent anthropological surveys have completely undercut that assumption. In 2015, researchers reviewed data from 168 cultures across the globe and found that only 46% of them showed evidence of romantic sexual kissing as we understand it. Less than half. Entire regions of sub-Saharan Africa, indigenous cultures across the Americas, and various groups throughout Oceania had no traditional practice of romantic kissing at all before contact with European colonizers. When explorers and missionaries first encountered some of these societies, kissing wasn't just absent, it was viewed as bizarre, even unsanitary, an act of literally exchanging mouth fluid with another person for no obvious reason. Charles Darwin himself wrote about encountering cultures during his travels where kissing was completely unknown and where his own affectionate gestures were met with confusion rather than familiarity. That statistic alone rewrites the whole story. If kissing were a deep, universal human instinct, wired into us the way smiling or crying seems to be, you'd expect it to show up everywhere, independently, the same way facial expressions do across every culture ever studied. It doesn't. Which means kissing looks a lot more like a cultural invention than a biological inevitability, something discovered in a handful of ancient societies and spread outward through trade, conquest, and eventually global media, rather than something buried in human DNA from the very beginning. But that raises an obvious question. If kissing isn't hardwired, why does it feel so natural to so many of us today? Part of the answer might be nursing. Human infants are wired from birth to seek out lip and mouth contact for feeding, and some anthropologists argue that romantic kissing may have originally evolved out of a much older behavior, mothers pre-chewing food and passing it mouth to mouth into an infant's mouth, a practice actually documented in numerous traditional societies throughout history. That association between mouth contact, closeness, and care may have laid the groundwork that later got repurposed into a romantic gesture once certain cultures started using it that way deliberately. There's also a simpler, more practical piece of this. Close facial contact lets you smell someone at extremely close range without it being awkward. And smell, more than almost any other sense, is deeply tied to attraction, memory, and even that immune compatibility signal we talked about earlier. A kiss puts your face close enough to pick up on pheromones and scent cues that you'd never register from across a room. So even in cultures where kissing wasn't traditionally practiced, similar face-to-face greeting rituals often existed instead, like the nose-to-nose greeting seen in parts of Polynesia and among the Inuit, which some researchers believe may serve a very similar underlying biological function, just packaged completely differently. So here's the picture that emerges. Kissing isn't one continuous ancient thread running back to the dawn of humanity. It's closer to a technology, discovered independently in a few places, tied to real biological signals your body already responds to, but culturally optional rather than universal. Ancient Mesopotamians and Vedic Indians documented it in writing over 4,000 years ago. Bonobos do something remarkably similar without any language at all, and huge portions of the human population never practiced it until relatively recently in historical terms, adopting it only after contact with cultures where it had already taken hold. That's the part that should genuinely surprise you. The kiss you gave someone this morning, the one that felt completely automatic, completely built in, is actually the product of a specific cultural invention that happened to spread successfully enough to feel universal now. It rode along trade routes, religious texts, colonial contact, and eventually movies and television, until it became one of the most recognizable human gestures on Earth. But it didn't have to turn out this way. In a slightly different history, you might greet the people you love by pressing noses together, or exchanging a completely different gesture your culture developed instead. Next time you kiss someone, there's a strange thought worth sitting with for a second. You're not performing some ancient instinct buried since the dawn of the species. You're participating in an idea. One that started somewhere specific, on a specific set of clay tablets, or in a specific ritual, and simply spread far enough and successfully enough that it started to feel like it was always there.